to launch a very important statement signed by over 50 international and Iranian activists and personalities. It is a call for the boycott of the Islamic regime of Iran for its crimes against humanity. At this conference, we have a number of distinguished speakers, and I will just say a few words in Farsi before I go through the program for this evening. به کنفرانس آنلاین برای اعلام کمپین جهان باید رژیم اسلامی ایران را به خاطر جنایت علیه بشریت طرد و منزوی کند خوش اومدید. در این امشب در این کنفرانس ما بیانیه خیلی مهمی رو که به امضای بیش از 50 شخصیت و فعال جهانی و ایرانی رسیده برای بایکوت، طرد و منزوی کردن رژیم اسلامی ایران اینو عرضه می‌کنیم و در برنامه امشب تعدادی از اون کسانی که این بیانیه مهم رو امضا کردن سخنران هستند. The program for the evening is we will have the reading out of the statement because the statement has not been published yet. It was embargoed. So this is the first unveiling of the statement in English and Farsi. And after that, there will be opportunity for our guests and for the media to ask any questions that they have. And there will be an opportunity at the end as well, at the end of the speeches for the members of the media to, if they stayed till the end, to ask questions again. The speakers for tonight include Mina Ahadi, and I will introduce each speaker in turn. Mina Ahadi, Peter Tatchell, Shahla Daneshvar, Saeed Naame Nasser, Shiva Mahboubi, Maryam Namazi, Rebecca Schönenbach, Shirin Shams, Muhammad Hisham, and we will have a video message from Joseph Dyer. Initially, Taslim Nasreen was going to join us or send a video, but unfortunately, because of internet connections where she is, that wasn't possible. And so after the speeches by our speakers, they will have an opportunity for 2 minutes each to add anything they want, a feedback or response or anything that they wish to conclude their speeches by. And there will be, as I said, questions from the media, an opportunity for the media to ask questions. And after that, we will close the conference. The speakers will speak for a maximum of 5 minutes. So, to the first point of the evening, I will read out the statement, which, as I said, is being published and unveiled for the first time. The world must boycott the Islamic regime of Iran for its crimes against humanity. Call by over 50 Iranian and international activists and personalities for a political, arms, sports, and cultural boycott of Iran's Islamic regime. In the latter part of the 20th century, the world community boycotted the apartheid regime in South Africa for its abhorrent racism, savagery, and denial of human status to the majority of the people. It is now time the world did the same with the regime of gender apartheid in Iran for its denial of human status to women, for its genocidal behavior, and for over 40 years of crimes against humanity. The international boycott of the racial apartheid regime helped the people of South Africa to get rid of an abomination at the end of the 20th century. A world boycott of the Islamic regime of gender apartheid in Iran will help the people of Iran to rid themselves underworld of another abomination in the 21st century. The criminal evidence for the boycott of the Islamic regime of Iran and its expulsion from the world community is horrific and overwhelming. This regime should be boycotted among many other instances of crimes against humanity for stoning women to death for sexual relations outside marriage, executing gay people, including by throwing them off heights, gouging the eyes and amputating the limbs of people for theft and other petty crimes, executing child offenders, so-called offenders, raping women political prisoners before their execution so they are no longer virgins at the time of their execution, considered a sin in Islam, executing people for renouncing and leaving Islam, executing atheists and those without a religion, executing and persecuting members of the Baha'i faith and believers of other religions and beliefs, summarily and secretly, without the knowledge of even their families, executing in the summer of 1988 thousands of political prisoners, many of whom had already served their sentences, and dumping their bodies in unmarked mass graves. Assassinating dissident writers, poets, translators, and political critics in the late 1990s by stabbing, strangulation, and other brutal methods, and then dumping their bodies by roadsides or on the outskirts of towns in what came to be known as the serial murders of dissident writers and political and cultural figures. Practicing rape and pedophilia against children by legally allowing girls as young as 9 to be married off. Throwing acid on women's faces for not fully observing the laws of compulsory hijab, Islamic covering for women. Assassinating exiled political dissidents abroad, including in France, Germany, Austria, Cyprus, and other countries of Western Europe, as well as in the neighboring countries. In operations organized by its terror groups, via its embassies and consular representations. Abducting members of the political opposition, smuggling them into Iran, extracting forced televised confessions, and finally executing them. Kidnapping foreign nationals or those with dual Iranian foreign nationality in order to blackmail those governments for money or for handover of its terrorist agents facing prosecution abroad. Under its Islamic penal code and judicial system, flogging women's rights activists, trade unionists, and other so-called offenders as part of their sentences. Under its gender segregation and gender apartheid laws, barring women from men's sections on buses, trains, gatherings, workplaces, beaches, and other public spaces, barring women from cycling and attending sports stadia where men are playing, barring women from many professions, barring women from singing and dancing in public, legally treating women as minors and men's dependents by requiring them to seek the permission of their husbands, fathers, or other male members of the family in entering employment, in getting married, in filing for divorce, and in being issued with passports. Treating women's legal testimony worth only half that of men's. Requiring a divorced woman to be remarried before gaining the right to the custody of her children. Granting women heirs only half the share of inheritance received by the male heirs. Deliberately downing passenger flight PS752 on 8th of January 2020, killing all 176 people on board and refusing to cooperate with international air incidents investigators, the governments of Canada and Ukraine, and the families of the victims in unearthing the truth of this horrific crime. Shooting and killing demonstrators in anti-government protests, such as in 2009, in 2017 and 18, and most recently in November 2019, when around 1,500 protesters were massacred. The list is endless. Any one of these abhorrent atrocities, any one of these instances of genocidal behavior happening not in the Middle Ages, but in the 21st century, should be enough to indict this regime internationally for crimes against humanity and to expel it from the world community. The Islamic regime of Iran is not the representative, but the murderer of the people of Iran. Every second of acceptance and tolerance of this murderous and abhorrent regime and its barbaric practices is the blight on the conscience of humanity. We, the undersigned, call on the world community, the United Nations, all the world's states and all international bodies to strip this regime of diplomatic recognition. We call on these bodies to implement political, diplomatic, arms, sports and cultural boycott of the regime. We call on all states to apprehend and detain upon entry to their territories the leaders and officials of this regime who have committed crimes against humanity. We call on the United Nations to refer the Islamic regime of Iran and its leaders to the International Criminal Court for prosecution under the offense of crimes against humanity. Just as the worldwide boycott of the regime of racial apartheid helped topple that abhorrent regime and system, so a worldwide boycott of the Islamic regime of Iran will help the people of Iran to rid themselves and the world of this criminal and barbaric regime. Condemnation alone of this regime's atrocities is not enough. It is time to take meaningful action. It is time to expel this regime from the world community for the sake of the people of Iran, for the sake of the people of the world. The initial endorsers and signatories in alphabetical order for this statement include Nazanin Afshinjam Mackay, human rights activist, co-founder, Stop Child Executions and the Nazanin Foundation. Khalil Abiat, LGBT rights activist. Mina Ahadi, political activist and rights campaigner. Rana Ahmad, women's rights campaigner from Syria. Jila Ahmadi, sister of Bahram and Shahram Ahmadi, executed by the Iranian regime. Artemis Akbari, LGBT rights activist from Afghanistan. Atra Azimi, poet and author. Dr. Mitra Babak, specialist consultant, psychotherapist and researcher. Botschafter für Menschenrechte, Ambassadors for Human Rights Organization. Shahla Daneshvar, women's rights and labor rights campaigner. Joseph Dyer, Swiss Syrian socialist activist, academic and author. Richard Dawkins, biologist and author. Dr. Gunda Dick, women's rights activist, Baden by Wien. Alia Magda El Mahdi, women's rights activist from Egypt. Leila Faraji, women's rights activist, sister of Maryam Faraji, killed by the Iranian regime following the December 2017, January 2018 protests in Iran. Ali Reza Farazmand, former wrestling champion and trainer for Iran's national wrestling team. International Society for Human Rights Germany, Internationale Gesellschaft für Menschenrechte Sektion Deutschland. Qadam Khair Faramarzi, mother of Bahram and Shahram Ahmadi, executed by the Iranian regime. Muhammad Hisham, LGBT rights and human rights activist from Egypt. Dr. Gabriel Kemper, literary scholar, Berlin. Amine Kakabave, member of the Swedish parliament. Nasser Kalhor, filmmaker and political activist. Hoda Kamel, labor activist, former member of the Retired Workers Association, Egypt. Leila Latifi, mother of Amir Hossein Saidi Nia, killed in flight PS752 Downing by the Iranian regime. Eric Lee, founding editor of Labour Start. Shiva Mahboubi, spokesperson, campaign to free political prisoners in Iran, women's rights activist. Farangiz Mazloum, mother of blogger, political prisoners Sohail Arabi. Yanar Muhammad, president, Organization of Women's Freedom in Iraq. Saeed Nauman Nasser, president, the General Federation of Trade Unions and Employees of Iraq. Maryam Namazi, political activist and rights campaigner. Taslima Nasrin, author, secular humanist, feminist, physician. Samir Nouri, spokesperson, Organization for the Abolition of the Death Penalty in Iraq. Shaghayer Nourouzi, actor and director. Stefan Peintner, Sekulare Flüchtlingshilfe, atheist refugee relief. Sholeh Pakravan, mother of Reyhane Jabbari, executed by the Iranian regime. Hurvash Purkian, chairwoman, International Women in Power. Parisa Puyande, chair, campaign to free political prisoners in Iran. Rahele Rahimipur, sister of political prisoner Hossein Rahimipur, killed in prison by the Iranian regime. Devin Rexvid, researcher on honor-related violence, Stockholm University. Nima Sarvestani, Swedish-Iranian filmmaker. Thibaut Scheenberger, Secretary Solidarité Party, Geneva, and co-secretary of Active Traffic, French-speaking Switzerland. Rebecca Schönenbach, chairwoman, Women for Freedom, Frauen für Freiheit. Simone Schwartz, executive director, SIDA International. Shaheen Mahimfar, mother of Amin Arshad Taj Mir, killed by the Iranian regime during the 2009 protests in Iran. Shaparak Shajarizadeh, women's rights activist. Shirin Shams, co-founder of Women's Revolution, women's rights activist. Ahmed Sherwan, human rights activist, secular humanist. Murad Sheikhi, former wrestling champion, trainer and judge for Denmark's national wrestling team. Bahram Soroush, political activist and rights campaigner. Peter Tatchell, director, Peter Tatchell Foundation. Claudia Talmaya, women's rights activist, Vienna. Ramona Wagner, spokesperson, Richard Dawkins Foundation for Reason and Science. Jenny Venhammar, Femen, Sweden. These were the list of the signatories and endorsers, the initial signatories and the endorsers for this very important campaign